Welcome to Occult Archives, where we dig into some of history's most, well, let's say, talked about books.
The books that sometimes send shivers down your spine just thinking about them.
Exactly. But we're not here to be scared. We're here to understand. Today we're taking a deep dive into Practical Occultism by J.J. Morse.
And we've got a little something extra to help us along the way. We'll also be looking at commentary by William Emmett Coleman. He was a big fan of this book, really thought it had some valuable insights about the spirit world.
So, kind of like a guide to the guidebook.
That's one way to put it.
All right, well, let's jump right in. From what I've gathered, Morse makes a pretty strong statement right off the bat. He calls the trance the doorway to the occult.
Yeah, he does. It's an image that kind of grabs you, doesn't it? Like he's saying, we can peek behind the curtain of death and get a taste of what lies beyond.
Without actually having to cross over ourselves?
Right, exactly. And one of the things that makes Morse's approach so interesting is his view of human potential. He's really big on this idea that we all share a fundamental, kind of like a blueprint of what it means to be human.
So when we see someone doing something remarkable, like entering a trance, it's not because they have some unique, special gift that sets them apart.
No, not according to Morse. He's more inclined to say that these are latent possibilities within all of us.
Okay, so it's not about having the gift, but maybe about having figured out how to unlock it.
Exactly that. And he actually talks about 3 different ways that this doorway of trance can be opened.
Oh, this is where it gets interesting. Lay it on me.
So the first is what he calls natural trance. Basically, this is self-induced. You enter the trance through your own efforts. The second is magnetic trance, brought on by another person.
Okay, that sounds a bit like hypnotism. Is that a common thing back then?
It was gaining popularity around that time. But the third form of trance is where things get really fascinating. He calls it spiritual trance, induced by beings from the spirit world.
Whoa, hold on. Spirit-induced trance. That's a whole other level. How does he even begin to explain that?
Well, it definitely raises some eyebrows, I'll grant you that. But his reasoning stems from his understanding of our spiritual nature. He says we all have this spiritual side that creates a kind of connection point with the unseen world.
Like an invisible antenna or something.
Yeah, kind of like that. And he suggests that these unseen beings, these spirits, can actually use that connection to influence our psychological state, leading us into a trance.
So it's not like they're possessing us or taking over our minds?
Not in the way we usually think of possession, more like a subtle nudge in the right direction from the spirit world, influencing our thoughts and feelings to the point where we enter that trance state.
Interesting. So let's say someone wanted to try this, to explore this doorway for themselves. What's step 1? Any secret handshakes or arcane rituals involved?
Actually, Morse starts with something surprisingly practical. He stresses the importance of having a clean and healthy body.
Really? Not what I was expecting. You'd think that exploring the occult would be all about, otherworldly stuff, not so much about physical well-being.
That's where Morse kind of flips the script. He believed that optimal health, not some kind of physical imbalance or weakness, was the key to reaching the highest levels of trance. He was all about keeping your body clean and functioning harmoniously.
So eat your veggies and hit the gym if you want to commune with spirits. Got it. Now, you mentioned magnetic trance earlier, the one induced by another person. That reminded me of hypnotism. Was there a connection there?
There were definitely parallels. Back then, they often talked about a psychic fluid or animal magnetism being transferred from the operator to the subject. This fluid was believed to affect the person's psychic energy, creating a kind of ripple effect that influenced their nervous system and physical body.
And this could cause some pretty intense reactions, right? Read about things like nausea, gasping, even spasms. Not exactly a relaxing spa day.
No, not exactly. Morse attributed those reactions to what he called the excitation of the lower brain, which then triggered a response in the upper brain and the sympathetic nervous system.
It's like your body's trying to process this influx of energy, but isn't quite sure how to handle it.
That's a good way to put it. And there were all these different techniques, different points on the body that these mesmerists, as they were called, would focus on. The pit of the stomach, the eyes, even the nape of the neck.
Each with their own specific effects, I imagine.
But the ultimate goal, regardless of the method, was the same. To shift your focus inward, withdrawing your energy from the external world and concentrating it on the brain. It was this inward concentration that they believed would awaken those hidden inner powers.
And this mesmeric trance, as he called it, wasn't just a matter of feeling deeply relaxed. He even compares it to death. Why such a strong analogy?
Well, he describes it as a temporary cessation of external sensation, accompanied by a heightened sense of inner spiritual perception. The idea was that by inducing this state, you were essentially mimicking the process of death.
A kind of practice death, so to speak.
Exactly. And he believed that when consciousness awakened on this inner plane, that's when clairvoyance, the activation of spiritual senses, could occur.
So people in this state could actually perceive things in the spiritual realm.
That's what he claimed. And he said that through the will of the operator, those experiences could be brought back into conscious memory, allowing the subject to recount what they saw and heard in the spiritual realm.
Like a traveler returning from a far-off land with tales of their adventures.
That's a great analogy. But he did offer a word of caution about relying too heavily on others for this magnetic induction. He felt that constantly being put into a trance by someone else could actually weaken your body over time, and too much focus on the inner world could potentially harm your ability to function effectively in the outer world.
So, like most things in life, it's all about balance. Don't go overboard. Now let's circle back to that spirit-induced trance. You said that spirits could somehow trigger this state in us. But how? What was their method?
Well, Morse believed that spirit people, just like humans, have their own kind of intelligence, their own powers, and what he called psychic auras. And they were able to perceive the spiritual character within our own auras.
So it's like they can sense our spiritual vibes.
Yeah, something like that. And this brings us to a crucial point that he stressed: mental cleanliness. He believed that our mental, moral, and spiritual state played a huge role in how we experience a spirit-induced trance.
Kind of like making sure your spiritual house is in order before inviting any guests over.
That's a great way to put it. He believed that the clearer and more positive our mental state, the more conducive it would be to receiving these spiritual influences.
Makes sense. So how did these spirit mesmerists, if we can call them that, actually go about inducing a trance? Was it like they were beaming thoughts into our minds?
He described it as a process of influencing the spiritual counterpart of our physical body through what he called our outer magnetic sphere. He specifically mentions that they often focus their influence on our affections.
Our affections, like our feelings and emotions.
Yes, exactly. He saw that as a kind of bridge between our lower animal nature and our higher spiritual nature. And from there, they would establish a connection with the lower brain and then work their way up to the frontal brain.
Sounds like a pretty complex process.
It is. He called it an internal to internal process, much more intricate than the simple transfer of energy between two living people. And the specific results they could achieve, things like personation, where the spirit seems to temporarily take on the characteristics of the medium, depended on the medium's own inherent possibilities.
So some people were better suited for this than others.
That's what he observed, and he considered this spirit-induced trance to be the most powerful form, second only to the natural self-induced trance.
Really? More potent than the magnetic trance induced by another person.
That's what he claimed. He did, however, caution strongly against trying to achieve a trance state through the use of drugs.
Yeah, that seems like common sense.
Yeah.
But what were his specific concerns beyond the obvious health risks?
He believed that using drugs was harmful on multiple levels. He said it would deteriorate the body, lower your moral and mental character, and could easily lead to dependence. It was like you were opening yourself up to negative influences that could really mess you up.
So, not a shortcut to enlightenment.
Not at all. Now, on the other hand, he saw the potential for real benefits from a properly induced spirit-guided trance. He said it could bring you closer to your own spiritual self, to a deeper understanding of your true nature.
And you could gain valuable knowledge and insights that you could bring back with you into your everyday life.
Exactly. He even talked about how magicians and sorcerers, through their rituals and the specific environments they created, could induce trance states in sensitive individuals. It was like they were tapping into the power of collective energy and focused intention to achieve these altered states.
So the trance, in all its different forms, really was the foundation of Morse's approach to the occult. It was the key to unlocking those hidden realms and accessing knowledge and experiences beyond the reach of our ordinary senses.
That's a great summary. He saw it as a way to gain tangible evidence of the spiritual realm, of our own inner potential, and of the continued existence of those who have passed on.
A fascinating perspective. And speaking of evidence, he then goes on to really unpack the whole phenomenon of mediumship. He gets pretty deep into the physiological, mental, and spiritual conditions that he believed were at play.
It's like he's trying to create a comprehensive roadmap to understanding mediumship. He acknowledges that there are many different views on the topic back then, some seeing it as a blessing, others as potentially dangerous. But he doesn't really take sides.
He's more interested in exploring all the nuances and factors involved.
Exactly. And one of his initial pieces of advice is actually quite practical. He says that the most beneficial experiences often come from those spontaneous manifestations of our inner life. In other words, don't force it.
Don't try to make it happen. Just let it unfold naturally.
Right. He felt that constantly straining and pushing to develop mediumship could be really draining and might not even produce the desired results. Focus on living your life, he said, and the rest will follow in due time.
Wise advice. And when he gets to the physiological conditions of mediumship, he talks about both nervous and psychical aspects. How did he see those two interacting?
Well, he actually stated that perfect physical health was compatible with mediumship. But he cautioned that the increased activity of your physiological functions due to these psychical influences needed to be carefully managed.
So don't go overboard.
Exactly. It was all about the medium being in control of their body, not letting the energies overwhelm them.
And it sounds like developing mediumship could have a real impact on your physical health, for better or worse.
He believed that a balanced approach, a gradual and mindful development of these abilities, could actually improve your physiology, strengthen weak areas, and contribute to overall well-being.
But if you overdo it,
Then you risk depleting your vital energies, which could lead to health problems. He blamed this not on mediumship itself, but on a lack of understanding and proper guidance.
so approach it with care and respect. Now, what did Morse believe was actually happening inside the body of a medium during a spiritual communication? What was his explanation for how these messages were being received and transmitted?
He described it as a kind of stimulation of the medium's muscular and nervous forces caused by the absorption of what he called a foreign spiritual and magnetic element. Basically, he believed that spirits were directing a kind of spiritual force into the medium's body, and this would trigger a response in the brain.
And this wasn't just a passive thing for the medium, was it?
No, he said it often led to a surge of mental activity, with new ideas and thoughts bubbling up.
So it was a two-way street. The spirits were influencing the medium, but the medium's own mind was also actively engaged.
Exactly. And he then made a distinction between what he called physical mediumship and visible phenomena.
Remind me again what the difference was.
Physical mediumship involved things happening outside the medium's body, but dependent on their presence. So things like objects moving or sounds being produced. Visible phenomena, on the other hand, were things that manifested through the medium's own body.
Like that personation thing we talked about, where the spirit seems to inhabit the medium's body for a time.
Yes, that's a prime example. And Morse considered this impersonating mediumship to be the most valuable form for seekers because it provided tangible evidence that could be perceived by the senses.
It wasn't just a voice in your head or a feeling. You could actually see and hear the spirit communicating through the medium.
Right. It was a way to overcome that initial skepticism that people often have when they first encounter the idea of spirit communication.
So it was a way to make the invisible visible. Now, what about the spirits themselves? How did they manage to control the medium's body during these impersonations? Did Morse have a theory about that?
He believed that they were utilizing the medium's own muscular and mental nervous forces to achieve these effects. And he stressed that the medium needed to practice responsibly, allowing for sufficient recovery time after these experiences to avoid any negative consequences.
So it was like a kind of energetic collaboration between the spirit and the medium.
That's one way to look at it. But he also cautioned against overdoing it, neglecting the body's need for rest and recuperation.
Pushing yourself too far could lead to problems, both physically and mentally.
Exactly. Now, moving on to the mental side of things, Morse identified several factors that he believed influenced the quality and clarity of the communication.
Okay, I'm curious, what were they?
He highlighted the controlling spirit or intelligence, the medium's own mental state and characteristics, and the mental atmosphere of the group or individuals present during the communication. He believed that all of these factors played a role in shaping the experience.
So it wasn't just about the medium passively receiving messages. There was a dynamic interplay between the spirit, the medium, and even the people around them.
Precisely. And he used this term mental atmosphere to describe the kind of mental and emotional energy that each individual brings to the table. He said it was a combination of their current thoughts, their past experiences, their education, and their inherent mental potential.
So it's like a kind of invisible fingerprint, unique to each person.
That's a good way to put it. And he believed that the spirit world had to navigate this mental landscape when trying to communicate through a medium.
It's like trying to send a radio signal through all this static and interference.
Exactly. And sometimes this interaction with a spirit could actually trigger a change in the medium's mental character. He didn't see this as the spirit taking over the medium's mind, but more like the spirit stimulating latent tendencies that were already present within the medium.
So it was like the spirit was acting as a kind of catalyst, bringing out hidden potentials within the medium's own mind.
That's a good way to summarize it. But he also pointed out that this could be problematic if the medium had ingrained beliefs or ideas that were inaccurate or biased. He stressed the importance of what he called mental purification.
So clearing out the mental clutter to make space for clear communication.
Right. He even gave an example from his own experience where their medium initially interpreted everything through the lens of their Christian upbringing.
That must have created some interesting challenges.
It did. They had to work through those biases to allow for a more neutral and objective interpretation of the messages they were receiving.
Makes sense. So once this mental purification process had taken place, what then? Did Morse believe that anyone could become a medium if they just cleared out their mental attic, so to speak?
Not necessarily. He felt that the specific type of mental mediumship that would manifest depended on the individual's inherent mental character. It could lead to clairvoyance, inspirational speaking, a deeper understanding of spiritual principles, or even the ability to channel specific spirits.
So it wasn't a one-size-fits-all thing.
No. Each individual had their own unique path to follow. And he saw this process of mental development as mirroring the physiological changes we talked about earlier.
Breaking down old patterns, stimulating new growth, and purifying the mental sphere.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal was to achieve a state of mental harmony and stability, a kind of inner peace. Now, what about the spiritual impact of mediumship on the medium themselves? What did Morse have to say about that?
I'm all ears.
He believed that developing mediumship had a direct effect on what he called the spiritual body and the essence of the individual's spirit. He saw the spiritual body as this intermediary layer between our physical form and our true eternal self.
So not just our physical body and our mind, but also the spiritual body that connects us to the spiritual realm.
Right. And he believed it was a real, tangible thing, not just a metaphor. He even said it was structured like our physical body, but on a more refined level. And he felt that the practice of mediumship could stimulate and activate latent possibilities within the spiritual body.
So it was a way to evolve not just mentally and physically, but also spiritually.
Exactly. And he saw mediumship as a kind of training ground, a stepping stone towards a more independent and empowered spiritual life.
Not just being a passive recipient of messages, but learning to use your own spiritual ability.
Right. He even suggested that the more evolved spirits would encourage this self-reliance in their mediums, guiding them towards that independence. He did, however, criticize mediums who were primarily motivated by money or fame.
He didn't like that exploitation of spiritual abilities for personal gain.
No, he called it a degradation of those sacred functions. He felt that true knowledge and understanding of the spiritual realm should lead to respect and a desire to use these abilities for the benefit of others, not for selfish purposes.
So it was all about intention and motivation. And this whole discussion of the physiological, mental, and spiritual aspects of mediumship ultimately leads to the idea of what he called adeptship.
Yes, that was his ultimate vision for the development of these abilities. He saw it as a state of mastery, where individuals could consciously and skillfully utilize their own spiritual powers.
A kind of spiritual self-sufficiency.
Exactly. And he believed that achieving this level of development would open you up to inspiration from highly evolved spiritual beings, leading to profound personal growth and the ability to help and heal others.
So it was a path not just of self-discovery, but also of service to others.
That's a great way to put it. And he emphasized that this journey of spiritual development, like any other meaningful endeavor, required dedication, effort, and a willingness to engage with the principles he outlined.
It wasn't going to happen overnight. Now, in his third lecture on mediumship, Morse really delves into the foundations of these abilities. He talks about the underlying principles that make it all possible.
Yeah, he goes beyond just the physiological and psychological aspects and starts to explore the deeper, more fundamental roots of mediumship.
And he argues that it's not just about having sensitive nerves or a particular personality type.
No, he goes deeper than that. He says that the foundation of mediumship lies in the very nature of human beings themselves.
So it's something inherent to our being, not some rare and unusual gift.
Exactly. He believed that we all have this subtle connection to the afterlife, these subjective qualities that allow for communication with the spirit world.
He even uses the existence of mediumship as evidence for the reality of spirits and their ability to interact with us.
He does. He says it shows that there's more to us than just our physical bodies, that we have these untapped superior powers waiting to be unlocked.
So for Morse, mediumship wasn't some weird sideshow attraction. It was a fundamental aspect of human nature and the universe itself.
He believed it was a natural unfolding of our innate potential, not some supernatural phenomenon operating outside the laws of nature. He even drew parallels with contemporary scientific ideas about interconnectedness to support his views.
He was trying to show that mediumship wasn't some spooky, mysterious thing to be feared, but something understandable and even, in a way, scientific.
He definitely had that rationalist bent. He talks about the physiological and mental aspects of mediumship, but then he goes even deeper, pointing to those more subtle abilities like inspiration, clairvoyance, and spiritual perception.
He saw those as expressions of our higher mental faculties, closely linked to our spiritual nature.
Yes, those were key to the subjective, mental side of mediumship. But he also reminded his audience that mediumship wasn't limited to what was expressed through the medium's personality. It could also manifest as those external physical phenomena we talked about earlier.
So it was a broader phenomenon that people often realized.
He made a clear distinction between the subjective mental side of mediumship and the objective physical side. But he said that the term mediumship really only applied when someone was acting as a channel for the intelligence of another being.
So you could have someone who was physically sensitive to spirit energy, but not necessarily a medium in the true sense of the word.
That's what he argued. And he actually challenged a pretty common belief at the time. That mediumship was a special gift from God given only to a chosen few.
He was pretty bold in calling that out.
He was. He believed that God wouldn't play favorites, that everyone had the same inherent potential for these abilities. He saw the mediums of his time as just the early examples of what would eventually become more widespread.
So everyone had the potential to become a medium, at least in theory.
That's what he believed. He essentially boils down the foundation of mediumship to two things: our spiritual nature and our interconnectedness with the universe.
He was big on that interconnectedness idea.
He was. He talked about how everything in the universe was linked at a fundamental level, that there were material counterparts to all thoughts and feelings.
So our inner world and the outer world were just two sides of the same coin.
That's a good way to put it. And he said that external mediumship, the kind that involved physical phenomena, relied on this universal law of sympathy and interconnectedness.
So it wasn't magic in the sense of breaking the laws of nature. It was simply operating on a level that most people weren't aware of.
That's how he saw it. And he introduced this idea of a neutral ground, a point of contact between the natural and spiritual worlds that allowed for communication.
Okay, so what was this neutral ground? What made it possible for spirits to interact with our physical world?
He believed it was our own organic structure, specifically our nervous system. He said it acted like a bridge, allowing spirit energy to flow into and influence the material realm.
So our bodies were literally wired for communication with the spirit world.
That's what he argued. He was trying to ground the whole concept of mediumship in a rational, understandable framework, stripping away the mystery and superstition that often surrounded it. He wanted to show that it was all based on natural laws and principles, not some kind of spooky magic.
It was a way to make it more accessible and less frightening.
Exactly. Now, when it came to developing mediumship, he was very clear that it was a serious undertaking. He warned against neglecting our responsibilities in the physical world in pursuit of spiritual development.
Don't forget to pay your bills and do your laundry while you're exploring the astral plane.
Right. He said there were plenty of people who were drawn to mediumship but might not actually have the aptitude for it. He advised those individuals to focus on more practical, earthly pursuits.
Better to be grounded in reality than to get lost in a world of wishful thinking.
He also cautioned against rushing into things, trying to force development through those injudicious and promiscuous methods he talked about.
Basically, don't cut corners.
That's a good way to put it. He felt that the best approach was to let things unfold naturally under the guidance of those wise spirit guides.
Trust the process.
Yeah.
And he also emphasized the importance of personal responsibility. Just because you could potentially develop these abilities didn't mean you should use them recklessly.
He was big on that. He said that using mediumship irresponsibly could be harmful both to yourself and to others, and he stressed the importance of maintaining good physical health.
So no late-night seances fueled by junk food and energy drinks.
No, he was all about taking care of your body, treating it like a temple. He even compared it to an athlete training for competition.
Makes sense. You wouldn't want to run a marathon without proper preparation. Now, on the mental side, he talked about the importance of developing what he called negativeness of mind.
Yes, but he clarified that this didn't mean suppressing your personality or becoming some kind of empty vessel. It was more about cultivating a receptive and sympathetic attitude.
Like quieting the internal chatter to create space for the spirit's voice to come through.
That's a good way to describe it. He also made a distinction between mental excitement and true strength of mind.
So it wasn't about being easily swayed or suggestible. It was about having a strong, grounded sense of self that could withstand those spiritual influences.
Exactly. And he warned against becoming so passive and receptive that you lost your own sense of individuality.
It's like that saying, be in the world, but not of it.
Yeah, I like that. Now, Morse also talked about the potential dangers of mediumship, the things that could go wrong if you weren't careful.
I bet he had some interesting stories to tell.
He did. He warned about encountering negative or deceptive spirits, those who might try to trick or manipulate you. He said it was important to develop discernment, to not assume that every spirit you encountered was benevolent.
So trust but verify.
Exactly. He even said you should test the spirits just as you would test a stranger you met in the physical world.
Don't be naive or gullible.
Right. He also cautioned against surrendering your reason and judgment completely to spirits.
Don't let them do your thinking for you.
Exactly. He said that could lead to all sorts of problems, from delusion to despair. He even cautioned against those long, rambling messages supposedly coming from famous historical figures.
So take those with a grain of salt.
Definitely. Now, on the flip side, he also talked about the potential blessings of mediumship when practiced responsibly. He said it could lead to greater harmony in your life, improved health, and even intellectual growth.
So it wasn't all doom and gloom.
No, he saw it as a path to self-discovery and spiritual enlightenment. He said that genuine spirit inspiration could be incredibly beneficial, especially for those with strong and discerning minds.
It was a way to tap into a source of wisdom and guidance that was beyond the limitations of our earthly knowledge.
And he also saw great comfort in the knowledge that those who have passed on continue to exist.
That death isn't the end, just a transition to a different state of being.
He believed that this knowledge could offer solace and even guidance from those we've loved and lost. He talked about the potential for angelic ministry, the idea that highly evolved spiritual beings could offer us help and support.
So there was a sense of hope and possibility in his vision of the afterlife.
Definitely. And in the long term, he saw even greater advantages: improved health, mental and spiritual development, the ability to communicate with spirits, and a deeper understanding of the universe and our place within it.
It was a pretty grand vision. He laid out this whole map of spiritual evolution, showing us the potential we all have to grow and develop.
And he did it in a way that was grounded in natural laws and principles, not just mystical beliefs.
He was trying to bridge the gap between science and spirituality, showing that they weren't necessarily opposed to each other.
Exactly. Now, in his fourth lecture, Morse tackles a really interesting topic: magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. He frames them as humanity's early attempts to understand and utilize unseen forces.
So not just something out of fairy tales or horror stories.
Yeah, he saw them as real phenomena, but often misunderstood and misinterpreted. He actually positions modern spiritualism as a more evolved and refined form of these older practices.
So like spiritualism was the next step in our understanding of the occult.
That's how he saw it. He said that things like witchcraft were essentially early forms of mediumship, but often more chaotic and uncontrolled. He felt that spiritualism brought a greater degree of order and understanding to these interactions with the unseen.
And he acknowledges that there was a lot of superstitions surrounding these older practices, a lot of fear and misinformation.
He does, and he talks about how magic was traditionally divided into categories like black, white, and red, based on the intentions and morality of the practitioners.
So black magic for evil purposes, white magic for good, and red magic somewhere in between.
That's the panic idea. He describes a magician as someone who has a particular kind of power, either through training or inheritance, that allows them to work with invisible beings or even influence higher powers. He actually outlines 3 levels of magic, ranging from those who work with lower-level spirits to those who commune with highly evolved spiritual intelligences.
So a kind of hierarchy of magical practice.
He actually draws a parallel between the highest level of magic and modern spiritual communication. He says that spiritualist circles are essentially doing what magicians have done for centuries, but in a more grounded and ethical way.
So seances and circles are like the modern equivalent of those ancient magical rituals.
That's his argument. And he even suggests that those seemingly bizarre aspects of magic, like the incantations and the mystical surroundings, actually reflected underlying principles that can still be helpful today.
So there's a method to the madness.
He believed that practices like bodily purity, meditation, and sincere aspiration could enhance the effectiveness of spiritual communication, just as they did in those old magic circles.
So it's not just about the words or the rituals. It's about the inner state of the practitioner.
Exactly. And he felt that modern spiritualism was able to achieve the same results as those older practices, but without resorting to things like invoking elemental spirits or trying to control nature's forces.
So it was a more refined and perhaps more ethical approach.
He also addressed those claims of what he called deeper magic, where individuals were said to have the power to command spirits and manipulate natural forces.
Like those legendary figures we hear about in myths and legends.
He acknowledges that these abilities might be real, but he maintains that they operate within the boundaries of natural laws. He says that no one, no matter how powerful, can truly transcend those laws. He then poses a really interesting question. Why focus so much on the magic of the past when we have access to those same phenomena today?
So look to the present, not the past.
That's his advice. He says that modern spiritualism offers a more accessible and understandable way to explore these mysteries, and that the phenomena we're seeing today are just as impressive as anything recorded in ancient texts.
So we don't need to romanticize the past. We have our own wonders to explore right here and now.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of understanding those natural laws that connect the physical and spiritual worlds. He says that by studying these laws, we can learn to utilize those latent powers within ourselves, achieving things that might seem like magic to the uninitiated.
So it's about empowering ourselves through knowledge and understanding, not relying on some external force or entity.
He believed that knowledge was the key to unlocking our true potential, both individually and as a species. And he stressed the importance of living a virtuous life, cultivating our spiritual nature, and developing a strong will.
Those were our best defenses against negative spiritual influences.
That's what he believed. He was all about self-mastery and spiritual growth.
A fascinating perspective. Now, in his 5th lecture, Morse really delves into the nature of the afterlife. He tries to bring a rational lens to what has always been a pretty mysterious and often fear-inducing subject.
Yeah, he challenged the idea that the afterlife is something entirely beyond our comprehension, something that can only be understood through vague symbols and metaphors. He argues that we can actually achieve a pretty clear and accurate understanding of what awaits us on the other side.
So death doesn't have to be this big, scary unknown.
He believed that we could gain real knowledge about the afterlife through communication with spirits. And he emphasized the importance of receiving clear and precise statements, not just vague pronouncements or symbolic interpretations.
He wanted facts, not just theories or beliefs. Expert speaker,